All right, hi everyone. My name is Rob Doggett. I'm at the State University of New York at Geneseo and the International Yeats Society, and I'm here today to talk about Red Hanrahan's song about Ireland with my friend Martin Enright. How are you, Martin?
Very well. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good to see you.
Afternoon for me, anyway.
Afternoon, morning for me. So it's good to see you, Martin. Martin's a retired award-winning teacher. He's a former president of the Sligo Yeats Society. He's an expert on the Irish language, on Irish music, on archaeology, mythology, anything you want to know about. He's not a native of Sligo, but he might as well be because he knows anything you need to know about Sligo. And if you haven't been, anybody viewing this, if you haven't been to Sligo or to the Yeats summer school there, you should go. And if you go, you'll be sure to meet Martin. So it's good to see you, Martin. And what are you up to these days?
Well, we're into winter time, and no more than your own query. There's always a couple of interesting Yeats queries happening.
Mm-hmm.
We're planning trails around the countryside, and I get various queries about place names and how to spell Barrasadair and how to spell various places connected with the Yeats extensive list of place names, about 50 places in Sligo he mentions in his work.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm enjoying the countryside because this is the time of year when the wild swans come to us. And the wild swans are cool to me are the hooper swans.
Mm-hmm.
12,000 hooper swans all nest in Iceland and spend the winter in Ireland. And they have come in almost on the day, 10th, 11th, 12th of October. And we had them last week and the week before. And equally the geese that Yeats mentions, the Barnacle goose in High Talk. This morning I counted 4,000 in the flock in North Sligo here. And that's always really consuming my interest all through the winter. The winter is always too short for me.
Well, I will soon be snowbound here where I am. So I enjoy the winter though too. So normally I ask people to pick their own poem, but I kind of picked this poem for you because I know, having talked with you in Sligo so many times, I know you are an expert on so many things around Sligo, and I thought, well, this would be a perfect poem for Martin and I to discuss. So if you could maybe start by just reading it for us, and I'll share the screen so people can see the poem. And we also have some images that we'll take a look at. So there's the screen for us. So Red Hanrahan's song about Ireland, Martin.
Red Hanrahan's song about Ireland by William Butler Yeats. The old brown thorn trees break in two high over Cummeen Strand. Under a bitter black wind that blows from the left hand, our courage breaks like an old tree in a black wind and dies. But we have hidden in our hearts the flame out of the eyes of Kathleen, the daughter of Houlihan. The wind has bundled up the clouds high over Knocknarea and thrown the thunder on the stones for all that Maeve can say. Angers that are like noisy clouds have set our hearts a beat. But we have all bent low and low and kissed the quiet feet of Kathleen, the daughter of Houlihan. The yellow pool has overflowed high up on Clough-na-Bare, for the wet winds are blowing out of the clinging air, like heavy flooded waters, our bodies and our blood. But purer than a tall candle before the holy rood is Kathleen, the daughter of Houlihan.
That's lovely, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think of this poem. It's an interesting one. We have this sort of tumult of the world, the natural world, set against this idealized, this image to which the speaker has this kind of fidelity. I think people who aren't super familiar with Yeats, some of the references here might be a little bit difficult. So maybe we can start by just going through and glossing some of the references here, some of the specifics. And then I know you want to talk a bit about the context when this poem was written in 1894.
Right.
So Red Hanrahan's song, it's go ahead with that character in Yeats.
Yeah, Red Hanrahan. We think that he's taking the direct link back from the 18th century into the early 19th century. Hanrahan is the wild man, but he's also maybe a metaphor for the poet Owen Roe Sullivan, Red Hugh O'Sullivan, who is the prime writer, I suppose, of the Aisling. His misty poem, Mist Ceodriachta, is the Aisling, where the poet goes out to the countryside and he is given the beautiful vision of the woman all dressed in white, and she brings a note of hope, that hope will come in the terms of the Spain and France will help the cause of Ireland. So Hanrahan is a figure that, it's a fictional figure, but I think it is based on the idea of the older Owen Rose, so the one who lived between 1748 and 1784. And he publishes the stories, the fictional stories of Hanrahan, first of all in 1894 in the National Observer. And in the middle of that story of Kathleen, Hanrahan and Kathleen, we have the poem. And prior to the poem, Yeats has the single line that Hanrahan tells the lady he meets on the roadside. He says, "A weight of grief is upon her," you know, referring to Ireland herself. So the whole poem is really, to me, it's it's a lament for Ireland. And Kathleen, the daughter of Houlihan, she's Kathleen Ní Húlacán, one of the allegorical names for Ireland, because from the penal days of the 17th and early 18th century, the poets couldn't use the word of Ireland in their poems, in their writings. And so they get around it in an Irish fashion, and they invent the names of Roisin Dhu, Dark Rosaleen, Kathleen, Helen, and these are enshrined in the poetry of the 18th, 17th, and 18th century, 18th, 19th century. So Kathleen is the daughter of Houlihan, and she's first referred to, and Yeats would have seen the book on the songs of Ireland, the love songs of Ireland by William Walsh, published in 1834 or so. Edward Walsh, sorry, 1847. And he's referring to the character of William Heffernan, the blind poet, who actually publishes a song called Kathleen Ní Húlacán, and that appears, as I said, in 1847. Now Yeats sees that, and it's a beautiful poem. And here is the translation of Kathleen Ní Húlacán as it appears in Irish popular songs from Edward Walsh in 1847. How sad our fate, driven desolate o'er moor and wild, and lord and chief in gloom and grief from home exiled, of songs divine, and feasts and wine, and science lorn, we pine unseen for Kathleen Ní Húlacán. Suppose not thou that wrinkled brow, or unkempt hair, our long years linger, did e'er disfigure the queenly fair. Her numerous race would find their place on Erin's lawn, if the prince had been with his Kathleen Ní Húlacán. Fair were her cheek, could we live to wreck the foeman's rout, and flags would gleam to the breezes stream ere victory's shout, and richest clad on the happy maid may trail the lawn, if the prince had been with his Kathleen Ní Húlacán. And the prince is probably Bonnie Prince Charlie, Prince of the Stuarts, the 18th century. It's a lovely translation from 1847.
That's nice. And you see the influence there, certainly on the Yeats poem.
Very definitely there, yeah. And equally, the influence of Douglas Hyde cannot be overstressed here. Now, this is some years before Yeats meets Lady Gregory. He's collecting the lore himself, and he meets Douglas Hyde. And in 1892, Douglas Hyde visits the home of JBY, Jack Yeats, John Butler Yeats, in Chiswick, in London, in Bedford Park, and where they initiate the Irish Literary Society. Douglas Hyde becomes vice president. And within 3 months, he's back in Dublin. On the 13th of February, 1892, he becomes president of the Dublin branch, if you like, of the Irish Literary Society. In 1893, Hyde publishes the Love Songs of Connacht. And enshrined in that, you've got The Twisting of the Rope, which becomes a short story in the Red Hanrahan stories. And that is Casa an Tuagáin, the name in Irish. but Hyde publishes as the Sushin Bone, or the comforting coverlet. And Yeats sees that also. We are very different about that. And here we have 1893, the Conan of Gaeilge is formed. Equally so, some very, very important archaeological and historical texts are coming from Sligo. We have the very well-known 3-volume work by William Woodmartin in 1892. And previous to that, the 1889 O'Rourke version of Sligo history, 2-volume work. And Yeats talks in his autobiography, he will say, in the county histories. He'll refer to Maeve or Knocknarea or something of the archaeology. So it's really very influential.
So there's an awful lot of context going on here. I mean, the one you're talking about with that whole Aisling tradition, which we've got the sort of dream vision of Ireland represented as a woman. We have all these folktale collections. We've got Douglas Hyde, of course, there. In the backdrop of this is all of the Irish language movement, which Yeats, of course, had a sort of somewhat ambivalent relationship with, in part because he never really learned Irish.
No.
But we've got the Irish language movement in the background. And then we have archaeology, which I found, you and I were talking about this one day, this poem one day, and I was really fascinated by what you had to say about the archaeology. But let's, before we get to the archaeological side and get back to some of that context, let's get a little bit of the specifics in here for people who don't know Sligo very well. So that the start of the poem, Common Strand, now that's the beach area, isn't it?
Yes, it's part of Sligo Harbour.
Okay.
And it's just off the northern slope of Knocknarea. As the mountain and the land sweeps down to the sea, it's down to Cummeen Head and Cummeen Strand. And it's about a third of the size of Sligo Harbour. And you're looking straight across at Benbulben to the north, and Knocknarea is right behind you to the south. Coney Island and Sligo Harbour, as I said, is very much part of that. And
I wonder if I could, with the screen here, maybe I could show, there's the image of Benbulben right there.
Well, Benbulben sweeps down to the sea at Drumcliff. So Drumcliff Bay, around the corner is Sligo Harbour and Ballysadare Bay, and they all form part of Sligo Bay. So that's, you see, it's essential. It's that picture there shows us Knocknarea and Benbulben, taken from about 15 miles to the south. So to the left of the picture, between the two hills, that's why Sligo nestles in the valley. Like the valley his fathers called their home in that poem Under Saturn, that Yeats referred to the valley. And to me, the valley is the land between Knocknarea and Benbulben.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary
Strand would be within walking distance of Merville House, the home of Yeats's Pollock's and grandfather.
And if the next line, and I remember asking you about this, and we've chatted about this before too, under a bitter black wind that blows from the left hand, the sort of the coloring of the wind coming from the left hand. I'm assuming the speaker's kind of standing on Knocknarea, I guess, and looking towards the south or to the west, I guess. So
well, if you're in Sligo and you're looking towards Knocknarea, sort of to your left hand will be east, and east of Sligo town is Innisfree, is on the lake of Lough Gill, and the mountains to the southern side of that are all the range of hills, the Ballygawley Hills. They're the Ox Mountains. And the easterly wind is the bitter wind, more than the northern wind. In old Irish folklore and Irish folktales, the northerly wind is so black it brings despair. It brings in a very dark, dismal feeling is the northerly wind, because it's a cutting wind, it's a cold wind. And it's the southern and westerly winds are more benign, and they're good for the fishermen and good for growth. So the wind features actually 4 times in the poem. It features in each of the verses and twice in the first verse. And as I said to you, every Irish person, they begin a conversation with the weather, because we can have all 4 seasons in the one day. And the weather changes every day. Today is a beautiful day. Like the poem picture I sent you a while ago, it's just a lovely blue sky today and clouds in the air. And so, there's foreboding and there's blackness and despair in that northerly and easterly wind. And the mountains are very bare. That picture there has has the pipsqueak on top is the passage tomb, directly connected with the passage tomb movement, which is Knocknarea being the shining example, I suppose, and in between, Sligo has about 1/7 of all the megalithic tombs of Ireland are in County Sligo.
Mm-hmm.
And the passage tombs are in their setting, usually in group formation on the hilltops and sometimes in low-lying areas, but generally on the hilltops. And so Knocknarea, the Calicavera's house is a small little example compared to the massive 40,000 tons of man-made material on top of Knocknarea. There's a close-up of what the locals call the house of the Calicavera, the hag of Beara, her house. Of course, it's her burial tomb.
So that's so just for people who aren't familiar with this, so Knocknarea, then we have the passage tomb on the top of Knocknarea, and then the reference in the third stanza to Cluth na Beara, that's the hag of the Beara you're talking about.
Cluth na Beara, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very definitely.
Yeah, so real specific geographical and archaeological sort of references going on here in this poem.
Yeah, because he is in Sligo in 1892 on 2 occasions, in November and December, for the death of his grandfather and his grandmother, the Pollexfens. Mm-hmm. He's back again. He's in Lissadale in 1894 and 1895. He's staying with his uncle George Pollexfen in 1893. Mm-hmm. And so he's toing and froing a lot in those years, 1891, 2, 3, 4, between London, Dublin, and Sligo. And the archaeology is being exposed through the publications. As I said, Knocknarea today is one of the most interesting passage tombs in Ireland. I mean, in Western European context, even is so important as an archaeological monument. But from the top of Knocknarea, you can see all of the Yeats country, as we call it. You can see northwards towards Drumcliff, east up towards over Lough Gill, and south towards Sligo town and Ballysadare, Colony, and even west to the western hills of Sligo. So it's a magnificent landscape up there on Knocknarea. And Maeve, she is the mythological Queen of Connacht, and she would be mentioned in those county histories and the archaeology of especially William Woodmartin, Gregory Woodmartin, and Monsignor O'Rourke. So he's well versed in what's going on in those years. And again, he's taking the whole thing of the Aisling and the love poems. I think it's a beautiful. It's in fact, Maud Gonne says in some commentary that it was her favorite poem. When Hanrahan's song about Ireland.
Yeah, and so many of his poems, the references to Kathleen often evoke Maud Gonne as well. Sort of ideal beloved, right?
I suppose the long, tall, the tall woman in the dark clothes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So
and it's precious. She's purer than a tall candle before the Holy Rood. Mm-hmm. I think it's a wonderful piece of work.
It's interesting with Maeve as more of the warrior woman, and then Kathleen as the sort of idealized
that's true
image of the beloved. So we have these two contrasting types of women here.
Yeah, and he has indeed the warrior class, the men of the warriors, the soldiers of Ireland, the men of destiny, the soldiers of Ireland, the Fianna, are at the foot of Knocknarea in his Wanderings of Oisin. Mm-hmm. The big long poem, which is published in 1889, is set at the base of Knocknarea. Mm-hmm. And he inculcates the warriors of the Fianna. They're gathering with their hounds and their dogs at the foot of Knocknarea. Beautiful setting.
It's interesting there. So this idea of again, this fidelity to an idealized Ireland that gets evoked in so many of these poems. Yeah, and the soldiers of destiny. That makes sense.
And of course, then Hanrahan, he doesn't fare too well when it comes to the twisting of the rope, because that story is published by Yeats side by side with the stories of Kathleen. And here, Douglas Hyde gives it as the twisting of the rope, the Catson Tugon in Irish. Mm-hmm. Yeats translates it as a story. And then within a few years, Douglas Hyde is retranslating that back into Irish to make a play of it. The twisting of the rope is first performed in 1900, And then it's the first play produced in the Irish language as Casa an Tugáin at the Abbey Theatre in 1904. Mm-hmm. So Hyde himself plays the part of Houlihan in that. And in the twisting of the rope, the poet, more or less the bedraggled poet who takes a shine to the young lady, and the mother isn't a bit pleased. Mm-hmm. So she devises this ruse to get him out of the house. And, you know, every house has to have a rope, and you have to make your own ropes and twist the rope. So she gets him to twist the rope, but he has to go back and back and back, and eventually he has to go outside the door. And when she has him outside the door, she bangs the door in his face, and he's not allowed in after that. So that's the essence of Casa an Tugáin, or the twisting of the rope. And that's the influence of Douglas Hyde. You know, I can't overstress the importance of the connection between Hyde and Yeats and the influence he has on Yeats. And again, in 1900, Yeats writes that lovely essay on nobility and ignoble loyalties when he is referring to the coming of Queen Victoria. Mm-hmm. And he writes an essay in one of the national papers about, you know, well, we did have our own royalty, and he's harping back to the idea of Kathleen and the daughter of Houlihan, and Ireland had a grand loyalty. We don't always have to own up to this modern royalty, which is what people were doing, coming out in their droves to welcome Queen Victoria. And Yeats gives a very strong rebuke, if you like, to what's happening. So he never forgets the importance of Gaelic Ireland, mm-hmm. and enshrines it in the most beautiful way, I think, in Red Hanrahan's song about Ireland.
Yes, Martin, how much you think Yeats was in tune with the kind of archaeological work that was going on at the time? I know, of course, the Douglas Hyde connections and
I didn't.
Archaeology, I don't know as much about. And one thing I was thinking about too is I know Knocknarea was excavated, right? But excavated pretty badly, I think, was it in the 1800s, right?
Yes. Well, very specifically, just after they found. They set up the Irish Literary Society in November it's in 1892. Mm-hmm. In December of 1892, 16th of December, Yeats attends a lecture by George Coffey, an illustrated lecture on the antiquities of Tara.
Huh. Okay.
And that's one of the first things he does before he gives his own talk. And Hyde gives a talk on the necessity of de-Anglicizing Ireland in the following month. And now this is 1892, but prior, of course, to that, I talked about the county histories and Wakeman's Inishmurray. But from the mid-1830s, 1836, 37, Ireland is mapped in the most extensive way possible, more extensively than any part of Western Europe, because the Ordnance Survey took Ireland as a base point. And they recorded not only the maps that were made then, the 6-inch sheets for the whole country, but the letters that accompany those maps, O'Donovan's letters, are a huge repository of lore and history and archaeology. Mm-hmm. And they don't get published later on. But the antiquarians, have been here, Denia, and Wakeman, because he goes to Inishmurray, he goes to other places. So all this, I suppose, the huge national institution of the National Museum takes on the collections of the Academy. And it becomes a huge national institution in the mid-19th century, 1960s. And we have we have actually more gold work from prehistoric Ireland than any country outside Greece. Ireland has the biggest collection. And a lot of these antiquities are being discovered in the mid-19th century through things like the railways. When the railroads are being dug, they come across hordes of gold objects. The Muhan find in County Clare and places like that. And several gold objects are turned up in the bogs, and they get handed over, and they get become part of the national collection. So, when Malachy wore the collar of gold in the old song, the collars of gold were there. They're still there today. They are amongst the prime possessions of our gold work, the national institution. So Yeats was in Dublin. He was seeing this happening, and I think very aware of the archaeological publications and the excavations of of their own kind through the late 19th century. But a lot of these finds are chance finds, and there's a lovely story from County Sligo of a gold collar, which was in the possession of the O'Hara family from Annamore House. And in the mid-20th century, the director of the National Museum was invited down to see it. And when he saw it, he said, "My God," he says, "where did you find that?" And he was simply told it was never lost. Now that tells you. And the O'Haras were, they were of the old Irish clan, pre-medieval times, going back for 1,500 years. And it's quite likely it was in possession of the family for generations and generations.
Something in the poem, this idea of connections and so many levels to the past and we have again that sort of Aisling dream vision poem, but we have these archaeological connections. We have the folklore and the sort of translations of folklore and these iterations of folklore we have to music and to these antiquities. And so it's really this kind of poem that's this real intersection of heritage connections, I think.
Yeah. I think I'd also mention George Petrie, who wrote a book on the Round Towers of Ireland, but one of his main works is The Ancient Music of Ireland, mid-19th century. And there you have the popular songs, and he refers to Edward Walsh and the poetry of Munster. So the poems, the songs, and the stories and the folklore, it's really all interconnected. And it's really part of what we are fortunate to be able to still live today. Where I live, my house, I can, at the front door, see to the west and to the left, Knocknarea, and to the east, at the hill of the Ballycawley Hills and Kylecover's house. So it's a benign landscape today as it was then. And I think that Yeats was fortunate to be living in Dublin at that time and to be exposed to the whole wealth, even though he didn't speak the language.
Right.
But he was able to be respectful, I suppose, of what was being done by all the other scholars, Douglas Hyde in particular.
Well, that's great, Martin. I think that gives us a really good overview and way into the thinking about this poem. And I appreciate having had the chance to talk with you today.
Well, it's been nice for me to revise some of these facts and figures. We've been reading them all our lives, but it's, when you zoom in on a topic, you have to kind of summarize in your head what are the main points. And I think we've covered those today in our explanation of the poem and its background and the beauty of the work of W.B. Yeats.
Thanks, Martin. It's nice seeing you.
Great. You too.